Okay, Grand Canyon air quality. So Grand Canyon has some of the best air quality in the world and also some of the worst. So it really depends. So if you look at the picture up on the right, you can see that it can vary. And in fact, if you were to think about a polluted day like that, where would you think that the worst air condition exists? On the rim or in the canyon?
In the canyon.
Yeah, in the canyon. And why would you say that?
Because I heard it in this room.
No, you came to the last lecture. See, that was a quiz. Very good. Yes, in the canyon, and that's because the air gets trapped, and it actually can be less healthy down in the canyon than up above where you have the air circulating around. Some of the sources that we look at in terms of, and one of the greatest sources is smoke. And that can be self-generated with our own prescribed burning or fires that are occurring around. And for the last couple of years with the huge fires in California, you could see a significant difference in the air quality at the canyons from that traveling. Over here on the right, this was one fire, a wildland fire that was occurring over on the North Rim. But you can see this was taken early in the morning, so you can see how the smoke travels down and settles. Also another point source is Navajo Generating Station, and I know there was some news on that today. There's some stuff on that today, and we can have Rick talk about it. If you have any questions about that, talk to Rick over here from the Grand Canyon Trust. But it has actually been one of the point source of decreased air quality in the Grand Canyon, along with the Mojave Generating Station, which is no longer working, but that was another significant source into the Grand Canyon. Actually the Navajo one affects the canyon more in the winter time just because of the change in air, where the currents go and the wind blows and so forth. So that's a pretty significant program, and I think the important thing here is that even though we have a lot of data that we started collecting back in the 1980s, it's still and we keep it up daily. We have these stations in different areas of the canyon, and we have an individual a technician who's been dedicated to go down and change those air filters and get that reading and keep that data going. And our air quality person who you heard talk on climate change the last time, both those folks are leaving us. So if you know of any folks who are good at air quality work, we're going to have some positions open here pretty soon. Okay, spring seeps and water quality. So water is life in the Grand Canyon, and it's very significant in terms of the habitat. I think Lori talked about this at one of the lectures in terms of vegetation. And then when we look at just the importance of water and how that vegetation, the animals, and even us as visitors depend upon the water. We have a thriving program, or I should say a growing program in terms of water quality, springs and seeps inventory, and with the uranium mining issue that's come up, it's now accelerated our efforts in terms of understanding water quality. So we do also have opportunities where we look to volunteers to help in doing water quality sampling and what we call rapid assessments for seeps and springs. So if any of you are interested, we're always looking for some good volunteers to help us in collecting it. Because as you can imagine, 1.2 million acres, we have a lot of ground to cover. And there's a lot of unknown about the whole water system of Grand Canyon. When you think about the plumbing, and you think about all the caves and karsts and the springs and seeps, and there's a lot of unknown about where does the water really come from. So we can see it coming out, but tracing it back and mapping that back to the source is still somewhat of an unknown for us. And that's where we're trying to link information together. And then vegetation, and Lori McCarrick, our vegetation manager, gave a presentation on this quite in depth, but I think the important thing is to talk about the variation of vegetation. So over 1,700 species in the Grand Canyon. And if you started on the north rim and hiked down and hiked back out to the south rim, it'd be like taking a trip from Canada to Mexico. And that's the variation that you would find on that exploration, just in terms of the life zones and then the ability for different plants to thrive. Climate change will be something very significant as we move further into understanding how climate is affecting vegetation and from the influence on this plant life. But something very significant and very precious at the same time. One tool that we're using to look at vegetation is we're doing a vegetation mapping of the entire Grand Canyon. And there again is quite a task, because we can take digital imagery, but at the same time we have to verify that. So that means people going down into the canyon in significant spots and then trying to verify that data and information so that we can get a complete map. Now, exotic plant removal program, and I'm sure that Lori spoke about this quite a bit, but this one is that's very significant. So when you think about natural vegetation, and then you think about exotics that are moving in, and we think about climate change, all of those coming together, we're trying to keep ahead of that. For example, on the river we have the tamarisk issue, and I think everyone would probably agree that that's probably beyond us to do anything about right now. But what we look at is we want it to stay right along the river and not end up going up into the side canyons. So our focus is to go in and keep it out of the side canyons. And then you get to the smaller type of plants, and it gets very significant in terms of these exotics moving in. And everything from surface disturbance, fires, that can bring in the opportunity for plants to establish. So we have a very active program, mainly based on volunteer efforts. This last year we had over 30,000 hours of volunteer efforts working on plant removal and planting as well, which is our next one. And our revegetation program, this one is on the edge. This was the Hermit Road work that was done. Very tedious work. So we started 2 years ago, knowing we were going to realign the road at Hermit. We went in and we gathered up all the plants we could, put them in a nursery for the next year. And then once Hermit Road construction was done, and this was this last fall, the folks went in and did a significant amount of work to get these plants back in the ground. And they're doing really well. And everyone was very excited because the last day that they got the plants in, then it snowed. So it's like, yay, we've got some moisture coming. So we think it's going to be very successful. But the other thing about this is any plants that we plant in the park come from the park. So we do not bring in any plants from outside. We may take seeds and germinate them and grow those in a different area just because we don't have the ability to be growing them, but they're from Grand Canyon and they come back to Grand Canyon. So you can see how tedious it can be, but it's very important to keep the integrity of the vegetation in a natural state. Okay, using fire to restore forest habitat. So these guys in the middle, they were very, very successful in keeping fires out of Grand Canyon for many, many years. And as a result, we're now faced with an overgrown forest and a lot of fuel loading and an imbalance in terms of habitat. So we're looking at, and we have been using fire as a tool to restore that habitat and bring it back to more of a natural fire regime. And also utilize fire as a means for bringing back other species that utilize a different forest structure. So with overgrowth in terms of the ponderosa pine forest, we find that it changes the habitat use in that area. So if we can go in and introduce fire, bring it back to its natural regime, then we see more animals and plants coming back that will of a more natural nature. Also down here you can see in the bottom, this is one of the measures. We have a lot of historic features that are out in the forest, and so they use these big fire shelters to cover the